Hello, I'm Christopher Lee. Welcome to Ghosts. Welcome to Hobbs Manor, my friend. Please excuse me for calling you out at such a late hour. I trust you had a pleasant journey. Mark my words, you have an eventful time ahead of you. Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Dr. Marcus Grimalkin, and I have devoted my life to the study of the paranormal. It is time for me to decide once and for all whether ghosts are reality or fiction. I hope that you can help me to make this decision. My visit to Hobbs Manor, a house that is world famous for its ghostly activities, is the climax of my life's work. I came here to gather the evidence around me, the documents, films, and records that I have painstakingly collected over the years. Make use of the research material that you will find inside the house. You will have to look carefully for it, as objects in this house appear to gain a life of their own. Use my findings to make your own decisions. If you join me on my quest, you may be rewarded with great knowledge, but be warned, you may not like everything that you find. This diver's helmet belonged to Mr. Montague. He caught the bug for underwater exploration. Unfortunately, a rather large octopus caught him. Justice is often blind, and there are some who would sooner take the law into their own hands than see a crime go unpunished. The case of Nell Cook, the servant of a canon of Canterbury Cathedral, plainly illustrates the dangers of setting oneself up as judge, jury, and executioner. Nell Cook tended house for the new canon of Canterbury Cathedral as best she could, and was rewarded for her diligence and devotion by deceit and gross impropriety. She had not always felt this way, and when the canon gave his first mass in the cathedral, she was suitably impressed by the character of her new employer. The old canon, who mercifully passed away after many years of ill health, was a kind but ineffectual cleric, more concerned with getting his meals on time than spreading the word of the Lord. Now, here before her was clearly a man of passion, who had directed his considerable energies and charisma in the service of the church, and yet there was something about the new canon, like the way he would never look her in the eye before he went to visit parishioners who would sought advice in spiritual matters, or his often extreme moodiness and irritability after returning from some of these calls. Nell put this down to his youth and passionate temperament, but she would soon find out the depths of his feelings. The canon was a man who kept odd hours, and it was difficult for Nell to arrange meals at set times. One evening, after watching the stew she had laboured over all afternoon grow cold on the dresser, she decided to wait for him to come home so that she could broach the matter forthwith. Late that night, Nell was drifting in and out of sleep in the kitchen when she heard the scuffle of feet and whispered giggling from the drawing-room upstairs. She couldn't believe it was the canon. She crept up the stairs to catch a glimpse of the intruders, and was sickened to the stomach by the sight that greeted her eyes. The young canon, obviously inebriated, was on the settle, being very familiar with a young woman. But the real shock came when the priest's companion turned around, revealing herself as none other than his own niece. Nell could bear the scene no longer, and stole off to her own room to a fitful rest. In the morning, the niece was nowhere to be seen, and the canon seemed in particularly high spirits. His hypocrisy appalled Nell, and she had to take her leave with some feeble excuse about tending to something on the stove. In the kitchen, her sanctuary, Nell brooded over the night's events. She decided to bide her time, as this might be an isolated indiscretion, not uncommon amongst men of the cloth. But deep down she feared the worst, and her instincts were soon borne out. The canon's niece started making more frequent calls on her uncle at his quarters, and their conduct together became more brazen and unforgivable. It was not something Nell could discuss with anyone else, so she resolved to deal with the matter herself. One evening, when she expected the canon's niece for dinner, she expressly made the priest his favourite meal, mutton pie, emptying a bottle of arsenic into the filling, and grimly smiling at the irony of it all. After serving the pie to them, Nell waited by the dining-room door, wondering at the effects of her special repast, but nothing happened. After the meal, which seemed to go on forever, the canon congratulated her on an excellent dinner, as usual, and said that he and his niece would retire to the study where she would help him work on tomorrow's sermon. Nell hurried to the kitchen to check that she had used the right bottle, when she heard a cry from above, the study. The poison must be doing its mischief, and so Nell took her time responding to the desperate pleas for help. When she reached the room, she found the canon and his niece writhing on the floor in agony, foam the colour of sage forming around their mouths, and their eyes wide with terror and supplication. But Nell simply watched them with a curious detachment, as if none of this was really happening, bade them good night, and retired to bed. yet her awakening was violent, wresting her from a deep slumber. Upon opening her eyes, she saw a crowd of people in her room, all speaking in agitated tones, and the most vehement amongst them was the man now shaking her roughly by the shoulders. Still drowsy, Nell could not fathom what her assailant was babbling, but when he mentioned the poison, the hairs rose on the back of her neck, and she recalled her actions of the previous night. It all seemed like a dream. Now, fully roused, she attempted to explain, to defend herself, but those gathered in her room were well past listening and only sought vengeance for the slaying of their priest. Nell was dragged from bed and into the streets, where the people who had once been her friends and neighbors turned on her with a viciousness that was breathtaking. Stones caught her in the head and chest, forcing her to her knees, blood pouring freely from a gash on her cheek, and still it rained stones, pounding her into the ground, her arms uselessly hanging by her sides, and then succumbed to the darkness. If only that were the end of it. On regaining consciousness, Nell found herself at the bottom of a deep pit, looking up at her tormentors, some of whom had shovels in their hands. She desperately tried to raise herself, railing against her attackers and accusing the priest of terrible sins, but their response to this blasphemy was a clump of earth that hit her hard in the face, filling her mouth and choking off her appeal. And then the next mound of dirt landed on her, and the next, until her body was covered by damp, cool soil. The last thing she saw through the clod of mud clinging to her cheeks was the poison bottle being thrown into the grave with her. And then the darkness truly closed in. Forever. The passage between the old infirmary cloister and the green court in Canterbury Cathedral is known as the Dark Entry, and Nell Cook's spirit is said to wander through this foreboding corridor, lamenting the injustice of her fate. It is also said that any who look upon the wretched apparition will soon taste death themselves. There are some for whom death holds no dominion, for whom a visitation from the grim Reaper is simply an opportunity to challenge the Dark Lord's presumptuous presence. Sir James Lowther, the first Earl of Lonsdale, was one such man, whose spirit was sustained in life, as it was after death, by sheer malevolence and an indomitable will. Lord Lonsdale, or Wicked Jimmy as he was better known, was an eccentric and haughty aristocrat whose tyranny knew no bounds, a sinister figure to many of his contemporaries. His greed for power in both business and politics was rapacious, and it was a foolish peasant who did not meet his criminal extortion of grain and livestock. The unlucky individual would be flogged mercilessly until Lowther grew bored of the amusement. He was also a man of unbridled passions, and this was to prove
Well, I think the symbol.
I think a ghost is something constructed by one's own mind, a mental image, a mental construction that is seen in the context of the ordinary world, an eyes open apparition. It's easy enough when you shut your eyes to have mental images against a blank background. It's harder for most people to have them in front of the filing cabinet, the piano, whatever it is. But I think that's precisely what a ghost is, and that's why they look the way.
This is a little device that's designed to detect the charged ions in the air. Now these ions can be either negative or positive. Positive is usually bad, it gives people bad impressions of the atmosphere of a place. Negative is usually good, it makes people feel quite good. So an excess of positive ions in a room would cause people to feel it was unpleasant, spooky, a bad atmosphere and so on. So we will check that out using this piece of equipment to see if there's any sort of reason why people might be feeling bad about a place anyway. And it could be that a ghost has some form of ionising field that causes people to see it in the way that ionised air will glow. So there could be some association, so we use this to check that. And looking around here, I'm afraid we're getting no unusual readings at all in this area where the ghost was seen. So at the moment there is nothing untoward happening, unfortunately.
What we have here is a wand sensor. It's a type of thermometer. And the useful thing about that is not only is it on a long lead so we can investigate temperatures physically, but because it has an illuminated digital readout, it's very useful for seeing even in the dark. And the change of temperature is noticed directly. Now, we can, if a report has been such as here, when there's a phantom has been seen under this particular beam, we can find out if a temperature change is associated with it, you see. It may or may not be. So we can look. Somebody said, there was something on this chair there. So we can actually leave it. Now, we can actually leave the thing, so we're not disturbing anything. We can go to where the readout is, even if it were in another room, because we can have the wire as long as we wish and see what's taking place at a distance. It's a good idea. So it's simple in essence, but it's the interpretation of the data that it gives us that is important, you see. This fascinating piece of machinery was constructed in case we needed to deal with a terrifying entity of some sort. Because people often say to us, have you ever been frightened with what you're doing? We've never actually been frightened, but you never know. If we saw an entity, we could in fact, literally, like the Ghostbusters, we could sort of, fire a beam of light, and we might have an epileptic ghost if we did that. But it is a very real piece of machinery. Now, it's very complicated, but in brief, on the side of the machinery, we have here a GSR machine, galvanic skin response machine, which you hold in one hand, and if you see something that's frightening, you could sweat. You might not realize you were sweating, but there would be a response in the palm of your hand. This then emits a high-pitched buzz, and if you felt uncomfortable, you think, my God, people have reported a sinister presence there, but I don't actually see anything. You hold this, and if you began to feel uncomfortable, it would be responded, you get a sound here, and then if you wanted to, even though you couldn't see it with your physical eyes, you could nevertheless upset it with that. It's very difficult with anything like this commonly to decide what is, as it were, subjective or objective. It's something that you think you're going to feel, or is there something really there? On one occasion we used it when there was something really there. We used it in a deserted church. We fired the beam of light at a swirling green, ominous mist, which exploded into trillions of glistening lights and rushed out of the door and disappeared. Now, we saw it, believe it or believe it not, that doesn't matter to me. But the fact is, it came in useful. We like the machine, we developed it, and it's fun. But the galvanic skin response machine does help you to decide if you are actually fit.
It was on a Sunday morning, very warm, very hot, about 11 o'clock in the morning, and the group of people I was with went off for a walk, and I decided that I was going to play the trumpet. I was outside, I think I was playing Summertime or something like that, and quite suddenly I was terrified. I mean, I really was absolutely petrified. I was cold, I had shivers down my back, and I was so scared I ran into the house. And I didn't know why I was scared, I just was. What I realised was, when I stopped playing, there was no sound at all, nothing. No birds, no pigeons, the trees weren't moving, none of the trees. Now in a forest, the chance of trees not being moved by wind is almost nil, but nothing was moving, there was no sound at all. That night, I was in bed, I don't know what time it was, maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, it was quite late. And I woke up, and again I was absolutely terrified, and I couldn't breathe this time. I mean, I really couldn't breathe. I was and that was it. But there was definitely something was getting at me that day. The two incidents just couldn't, especially the still trees. I mean, that's the thing. Still trees and no bird singing in a forest. But it was well, if that wasn't being haunted, I don't know what was. You know, I mean, it's really quite a serious thing, which I'll never forget.
Should Bettiscombe Manor is quiet these days, but it was not always so. The villagers in this lonely nook of the Dorset countryside still recalled tales of a terrifying scream that was said to originate from a skull kept in the manor. In 1685, Azariah Pinney, the lord of Bettiscombe Manor, was banished to the West Indies for his allegiance to the Duke of Monmouth. A man of acute business sense, Pinney made good his exile and prospered in the God-forsaken colony, accruing a vast fortune which was turned over to his heirs on his death. 2 generations were to pass before any of Azariah's kin dared set foot on English soil. It was his grandson, John Frederick, who returned to England in 1734 to reclaim the family seat in Dorset, bearing considerable riches and a Negro servant from the Isles. However, shortly after their arrival in the country, Frederick's manservant, Isaac, was stricken with a malady that racked his body for days and only eased when the wretched fellow approached death. It was on his deathbed that old Isaac, who had served the family well, pleaded with his master that he must be taken back to his homeland for burial. If not, a terrible curse
Approached the abbey, walking across the fields, over a fence, looked up, could see the abbey and what looked like a procession of monks or hooded monks. Couldn't see any faces or anything, but there were definitely monks walking towards the abbey. At this point we heard a cough which sent shivers down my spine, and as a group of three of us we all turned and ran, and leaving the scene just as fast as we could. Having prepared yourself to actually believe that they existed, to actually encounter something and feel something, then gives you the exact opposite of saying they don't exist, it can't be happening to me, they don't exist at all. It's very difficult to get your mind around it.
Local vet Keith Michael has assured us that the cat will make a full recovery. And finally, tonight's special report investigates a real-life haunting. The residents of this 300-year-old house, set deep in the countryside of West Yorkshire, England, have been experiencing strange phenomena. An apparition of a woman, known as the Nanny, has been seen in various locations around the house, invariably carrying washing in her arms. Local historian Norman Reed told our reporter that local records show that a wet nurse lived here in the 18th century. Witness Mavis Hartley is convinced that the apparition she has seen is the spirit of this woman. We have arranged for Ruth Breary, a woman with psychic abilities, to visit the house to give her opinion of the ghostly events. She has not spoken to the residents before and has been told nothing of the events. Ruth's visit to the house proved largely uneventful until she entered the small bedroom on the first floor. She made the following statement to our reporter after the event. As soon as I stepped into the bedroom, I felt a wave of oppressive cold come from the eaves and near the fireplace. I knew that this was a place where the spirit had slept. I didn't need to see her to know she was there. You've been watching Viewpoint. I'm Ria Searcher. Good night.
Look Remember the words of the Spirit. Are you sure you want to leave the house now?